Welcome to New Research at Noon. It's November 5th, and we are so delighted to be able to talk to you today with two wonderful senior doctoral fellows from the Buddhism, Psychology, and Mental Health program. We have Daniel Ramjattan. Did I pronounce that right?
Yes, yes.
Great. And Anthony Scott. Anthony Scott goes by Tony. We also have some wonderful faculty here from Buddhism, Psychology, and Mental Health. Program Director Professor Francis Garrett is here. Ellie Weisbaum is here. We have some new college folks with us as well, and some new college students. Welcome to everybody. We are so happy to be talking with Daniel and Tony today. And the way we like to start our interviews is having each of them tell us what university they're doing doctoral work in, what program they're doing their doctoral research in, and how did they find that program. And Tony, do you want to go first?
Yeah, thank you so much for the introduction, and really happy to be here with my senior doctoral fellow and everybody else. So my name's Tony Scott, and I am at the University of Toronto doing my doctoral program at the Department for the Study of Religion. And I'm working under Professor Christoph Emmerich. And so he works on kind of Buddhist literature, South and Southeast Asia. And the actual program itself, I kind of found now, maybe this is a little bit funny to say, but I found it first by failing terribly to get in other places where I thought maybe I wanted to go. And so I didn't really know how to do the process of applying for graduate school. It was quite a difficult process for me, partly because I was finishing up my master's at the University of Hong Kong. And so there was a slightly different kind of culture as applying to programs in North America. And I thought I wanted to do one thing. And then after failing the first time and reevaluating what I wanted to do, I was working in the fire as a forest fire tower watch person deep in the forest in northern Alberta, and I had a lot of free time, so I started reading, I started researching, and I found the University of Toronto, and there's Francis there, there's Christoph there, there's Amanda Goodman, so those were some Buddhist studies scholars who really appealed to me. And when the first time I went there, everyone was just super friendly. Before I had a chance to actually, before I was fortunately accepted, I went there to kind of check things out and to meet people. And I was about an hour late for my first meeting because of the time change, a little bit silly, but everyone was super graceful and very forgiving. I found it a very friendly atmosphere. So it was the right fit for me in terms of the personalities, I should say. And that's how I kind of landed in Toronto. And I'm very happy that I did so.
So much already to learn from that first story, Tony. Lots of us, when we begin to think about graduate school, particularly if we are living not in the same country we're going to go to school at, need to prepare. And we don't always know how to prepare, which is why I'm so grateful that you are helping new college undergrads think about preparing. And I really, really appreciate the way that you talk about trying to make a visit to the place where you're thinking of spending the next few years of your life, trying to meet folks. And what was so important is you found the faculty that you would be working with to be friendly and welcoming. And if you have a chance to meet face to face, which is complicated in these times, we know that can make a difference. Yeah, so great. Daniel, how about you? Where are you studying, and what's the name of the program, and how did you decide that that was a good place for you?
Thank you again for having me, and I'm really excited to be here, and it's also great to be here with Tony as well, and all these amazing scholars. I'm actually of course, at the University of Toronto, and I'm in the Faculty of Music, which is a little bit strange because I'm here for Buddhism, Psychology, and Mental Health as the doctoral fellow there. But you'll find out why in a moment. But I actually I'm studying. I'm not actually in a PhD program. It's a doctoral program, but it's called the Doctor of Musical Arts program, a DMA. And what this is a type of program that is very similar to the relationship between the Doctor of Ministries versus the PhD in religion, or the PhD in divinity. It's a very similar kind of relationship, in the sense that in Doctor of Musical Arts, you have a performance component. So there's a very core component where I have to do recitals, 3 recitals. I have to do ensemble work. I have to do all these other things that are related to physically playing my instrument. And I'm a classical guitarist, so I'm in classical guitar performance. And so I have to do that on top of trying to be a scholar at the same time. But so it's very challenging, and there's an academic element to it. So I found University of Toronto because I had studied briefly in the States, and I was looking at a lot of different schools there, and was looking all over Canada. But I really liked that University of Toronto had a nice combination between the rigor of the academic requirements. A lot of times in these DMA programs, the academic rigor is not as strong in favor of more performance, which I definitely appreciated. But I really wanted to explore a new topic and learn something new about what I was doing. I wanted to actually diversify in my field a little bit more, and so that's how I ended up here. But I was coming from the University of Ottawa, and so.
Fantastic. We'll continue with you, Daniel. Why did you decide to do doctoral research? Not everybody decides after they finish their first graduate degree, a master's, that the doctorate is really for them. It's setting yourself up for several years of intense study. What made that seem appealing to you?
Well, in music, surprisingly, a lot of people try to finish a terminal degree in the culture, I guess, in classical music, and also in jazz more recently. This is becoming more of a thing, and part of it is that you get a chance to own your craft for many more years in an intensive environment with many like-minded individuals around you. And part of it is that after the master's degree, I really wanted to be able to teach at a university, and that was something I had a goal of doing. I remember when I was 12 years old, I did like a careers class project, and in the careers class project, I wrote I wanted to do a doctorate in music at the University of Toronto.
Wow,
which is very bizarre. Yeah, I remember that being like that. I remember very specifically writing that into that slideshow. It was very bizarre. So it's I kind of living that now, and it's something I've always wanted. So yeah.
Daniel, how did you know that there was a doctoral program at the University of Toronto at?
Yeah, well, music in Canada is very connected in classical music. It's a surprisingly small world, and then classical guitar is even more niche. So we all know each other, and we know all the teachers and stuff, and and so Jeffrey McFadden, who is my supervisor, is a extremely renowned guitarist who has recorded countless records, and is just has done so much for the guitar, and so I really wanted to work with somebody who could help me work with that precision and that level of depth that I was sort of missing in my playing. I'm a kind of a more emotional person, but I wanted that depth and that precision that he's capable of delivering, and so that's how I ended up here. Yeah, and University of Toronto, of course, is it's very famous all over the world for being a great academic institution. So I wanted to have the research possibilities that would be afforded to me in an environment where so many other disciplines are at such a high level. If I went into a smaller school with and I went just for the teacher and just for the guitar, then I might not have had that experience. I might not be able to do anything interdisciplinary. So I'm really excited that I was able to do that.
So Daniel, have you been playing guitar since you've been very young?
Yeah, and since I was, well, no, I'm a little bit of a late bloomer. I started when I was 10.
That's
But
considered late in the music world, right?
yeah, so I started then, and yeah, I've been doing it since then. So
We had a really fun response to the idea of the career assessment. Professor Garrett Francis said her son's career assessment suggests that he would become a puppeteer. And so, Francis, do you want to unmute? What is he doing now?
Oh, he's still a teenager, so I guess there's still hope for the puppeteer path.
That's so great. That's so great. Tony, we're going to go to you now. And can you answer the same question? You were in Hong Kong, living life in Hong Kong, and you finishing your master's. What made you want to go on to do doctoral work?
Thank you for the question. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot that goes into it, but I think it ultimately started with my older sister. So I have a sister who's about 11 years older than I, and than me, and she was the first in our family to go to university. And I remember just really kind of looking up to her and being so proud of her, even though I was, very young, that she was living this kind of life where she was very independent, and she was meeting all these people and having these experiences. So that's what really kind of drilled in university into my mind as the path I wanted to take. Then for my undergrad at the University of Calgary, I did two humanities degrees, one in English literature and one in philosophy, an honors in philosophy. And I mean, when you start to do your humanities, you're learning about history, you're learning about different languages, different philosophies. You just really scratch the surface. And so I think a big part of it was for me, after having spent about 6 years learning about all of this, I had really just begun. And
Right.
so there was this forward kind of momentum where I thought, well, I barely know anything. And a large part of that too had to do with I went to 3 terms abroad while I was at the University of Toronto. I went to India for 6 months, to Ankara and Turkey, and to Hong Kong actually. And so that's where I realized not only do I know very little bit about the so-called Western tradition, but there's so much more out there that I haven't even begun to learn, and that I'm really so naive about. And so that's what really made me want to learn about other cultures than the one that I was raised in. And so there's a little bit of kind of transgression there too, in the sense that I wanted to get outside of these Western meta narratives, the stories we tell about ourselves, and we think this is reality, and these are the fundamental principles or axioms of our society. And when I went to India for the first time and thought, oh, this group of people, this community, this set of communities here has a whole different set of narratives and axioms, that really kind of blew my mind. And just that there was a possible difference. And I wanted to learn a lot more about that. And so it was some of this international experience. The other two things I'll say quickly is that I love to write, but I was very undisciplined writer, and I had no one to read my writing. So I would write things, and my family was like, "This is weird," and it was weird. And I had no kind of direction, and so I think I wanted to do doctoral research to learn the craft of writing, which has been very difficult, and it's been really painstaking being disciplined like that. But now I'm at a point where having, and I'm sure Daniel can relate to this, maybe a little bit less, but I'm sure you do a lot of writing as well, and everyone here, just daily writing, even though it's no good, and just constantly getting feedback on it, and submitting it and being rejected a lot, but having the ability to write a lot was really important. And then, if I may, one more kind of unofficial part of this, and this is, I feel a little bit embarrassed to say this in front of Francis, because there's a little bit, I feel sometimes, of a generational shift in Buddhist studies, in the sense that a lot of my colleagues and I of my generation were kind of personally invested in Buddhist studies as well, or Buddhism, you could say. And I can talk more about this, and I have some theories about the idea of objectivity, and how that kind of works in the university. And I think it's important to have distance. But my experiences in Hong Kong studying Buddhism made me kind of personally invested in it. And so there was this personal passion that drove me into the doctoral program, that may have helped me overcome certain obstacles of time, pressure, money, all those things. And so I think I have to admit that unofficially, it was because I was just personally invested in Buddhism. as a tradition, as a practice, as a what have you. And so that gave me a kind of personal motivation to plow through, and despite a lot of the sacrifices and difficulties of joining the doctoral program.
Thank you so much for that, Tony. So what I'm hearing are similarities in both you and Daniel are very much interdisciplinary thinkers, very much interested in the connection of a variety of different ideas. Both of you have practices that you want to become more skilled at and have deepen your ability to perform. With Tony, it's writing. With Daniel, it's music. And there's something about your connecting a various set of ideas with some deep skill development that's really, really interesting. I'm going to ask one more question. I'm going back to Daniel, then Tony, and then we're going to open it up for some questions. We have some new people who've joined us. Welcome, Fung, and welcome, Michaela. Lovely to see you both. I think we talked about Fung from the principal's office before. Michaela is Jeff Newman's wonderful colleague in the library. So we have more folks who are able to join us now. Reska has just joined us. Welcome, Reska. We're in the first set of questions with Daniel and Tony. And here comes the next question. Can you talk about an important moment in your doctoral journey? And I'm sure there are many, and coming up with one isn't easy, but often when you talk about that, we have some real insight into what the experience means to you. So we'll start with Daniel, and then go to Tony, and then get ready, audience. If you have any questions you want to ask, we'll have some time to answer your questions. So Daniel, an important moment in your journey.
Yeah, this is a very hard question, of course, because you know, I was I had the good fortune for you to have sent us the questions a little early, so I had a bit of time to reflect on this, and what I'm going to say is I feel like there might be an expectation that this is a happy moment, but it's actually not at all. It's a quite dark, and
okay.
And when I was in my so originally when I started my doctoral thesis, the thing you do in DMA is we're not really considered academics in the same kind of way that other fields are, where there's a focus on I want to get good at my instrument and I'm writing this paper so I become an expert in this very narrow stream that even other musicians might be a little estranged from. So I was studying the guitar music of R. Murray Schafer, who recently died this year, but he's a great composer and one of the most prolific composers that Canada's ever had, and he wrote 2 guitar pieces. So I was going to do my thesis on that. However, in my first year, I was very ambitious, and I had all these projects in my mind. And in my first year, a very good friend of mine, who was a colleague at the University of Ottawa, well, a good friend of mine, not just a colleague, he committed suicide, and he was a violist, and he was a very accomplished violist. Like he had went to Curtis Institute for Music, and which is a very, very prestigious school in the U.S., very similar to Juilliard. And he came back to Ottawa, and I won't go too far into the details, but it was very, very painful. He had bipolar disorder, and there were a lot of different things that were happening in his life that I looked at and I said, you know, if he had the right support in the right way, would things be different? Because we have what is very, very similar to what we would call a guru relationship in classical music. And so we have, even in the academic setting, from undergrad up until doctorate, we have a private teacher. And that private teacher, we see them once a week. And that person teaches you the instrument, but there are certain responsibilities that are conventional to just avoid from their perspective. And one of them just seems glaringly obvious. It's the idea of music performance anxiety. So which is the topic of my study. So music performance anxiety might not seem like a big deal when we look at it on TV. We see a character and he's like really scared of going on stage and, oh no, I'm so scared even though I prepared. And then it goes well and so on, and it works out. But in real life, music performance anxiety is a lot darker than that. It goes quite at it hits at the root of the self. Diana T. Kenny, who is one of the leading scholars in this field, has described it as a crisis of the self, and which is very, very interesting because so many musicians build their lives around this topic, and they build their lives around being a musician. Like my Facebook profile is a picture of me playing guitar. Every single picture of me that I can find is a picture of me playing guitar, and most musicians I know are very, very similar. So they're deeply, deeply embedded with this. And so any kind of damage that happens to that, a bad performance, similar things can be not just career destroying, but life destroying. And I saw this happen in the very, very advanced levels. So even as the irony is that as people get better and their career and reputation increases, music performance anxiety seems to get worse rather than better when it's untreated. So I really felt that I took a bit of time off. I took some courses in Buddhism, psychology, and mental health. And as an undergrad, I enrolled in that and took that in concurrent with my doctoral studies, and then decided that this is what I really wanted to do. So I always think of that when I think of, that's probably the most pivotal moment for me in going into this field. And I've always been very adjacent to mental health in my life. So and Buddhism is the thing that brought me to exploring music performance anxiety, because I became a Buddhist because I wanted to study meditation, and I figured the best way to learn meditation to deal with my music performance anxiety, which was speculative, was to go to a temple. So I went to a temple, and then I was very, very averse to religion or any kind of religious thought. And I said, I'm going to question every single thing that they say. So every time I learn anything that seems vaguely religious, I'm going to question it and really, really look at it from every angle. And I found that there was something fundamental I could not disagree with at all. I could, and I eventually, after a while, I was like, I have to become a Buddhist now. And so that brings me, the music performance anxiety is what led me to all of this. Anyway, that was a little bit long, but yeah.
It was a fabulous story. Thank you so much for sharing and reminding us that important moments on our journey aren't always light and celebratory. Important moments are dark, and sometimes it's through the struggle of dark moments that you move to a place that you need to move to and that you are in right now. And when we get to the next set of questions and listen to you talk about your project, I am sure the story you just told us, will provide us with such a different frame for understanding all of the things that you're talking about. And, for the folks who are thinking of graduate work, or my colleagues who are always thinking about what's the next research program or what's our next teaching program, what I'm struck by is how Daniel's deep reflection into self, into what it was that you needed to work on at a particular moment in your life, led you to advanced study, and how doctoral studies and advanced studies don't have to be disconnected to who we are as people. And I just think that's such a powerful story. So thank you, Daniel. There's lots of chat going on. After we hear from Tony, who answers the same question, we're going to get to the chat and open up the mics so folks can continue the discussion you started. So thank you, Daniel. Tony, an important moment in your journey, and then we'll have a conversation.
Yeah, thank you so much, Daniel, for sharing. I mean, I think it's super important to highlight those mental health ups and downs that we feel during our experience. And I'm very sorry to hear about your friend. And I think that these are kind of issues that affect all of us. Life happens while you're in the PhD. And so, I think it's important that you kind of highlight that. and that just makes me think, because originally I had this was my one moment, and then I thought, those, you say the most important moment. I mean, the one I'd like to talk about is a little bit more of a happier moment, but there's been points where, I've been so stressed. Like, I joke that I used to have long, beautiful blonde flowing hair before I started my PhD, and now not so much. And I mean, I think that's half a joke. It's kind of half true. Moments where I was, really stressed out physically as well as mentally, and could feel that. There was a big conference we planned for 3 years, and at the end of that, I was so happy, but I was also so exhausted. And it almost took me like a year to recover, even after we do something called the comprehensive exams, for those of you who don't know, which is where we have to write, 2 exams, probably about over a 5-hour period, where you make and break your PhD career. And that was also a really happy moment, but extremely exhausting. And that again took me like months to recover. But I do think that the most important moment for me was going to Myanmar, or also known as Burma. And so I've gone there 3 times, and that's where I do my research. And that's what I research. I had never gone there before I started my PhD program. So I had read about it for 2 years, or I had been learning the language. I've been thinking about it. I've been imagining it. But going there was such an important point. And I would go with my partner. So her and I would join together. And it was an amazing experience. It was also really difficult. It's a very hot place. I'm from Alberta, which is dry. It's very hot and humid there. Obviously, there's a lot of issues in terms of the population's kind of freedom, and I mean, I don't like that word freedom, but just their ability to exercise their human rights and things like that. But the second year that I had gone there was when I started doing archival work. And it was really kind of amazing, because I'd go to the university central library at the University of Yangon and look at these newspapers from about 1948 to 1955. And so just spending days and days in the archives looking at these newspapers and just finding anything that was about my project, who's kind of a meditating monk who caused a little bit of an uproar at that time. And I found a few good pieces of information, but there was a missing month in the archives that I had. It was December 1955, December 1949. And so I was like, I know there's something in that month of that newspaper, but I can't find it. And so then eventually we went from Yangon to Mandalay, and I went to a different set of archives and spent a couple of days there, and finally found this month and found this one article that just blew up my whole dissertation, and was able to allow me to make all these different connections, and it had a different angle on everything that I was looking at. And so it was the moment that I found this article where I knew that, okay, I can do this dissertation, I can do this research, there's something that I can say and contribute with it. And it was a little bit like finding a fossil, because I'm from the Badlands of Alberta, and there's a lot of dinosaur fossils, and they say it takes about 80 days to find like a museum quality full specimen dinosaur out in this area. And so it was like finding a skull of a let's say of a meat eater or something. I prefer the herbivores, but finding the skull of a raptor. And so that was so amazing, and it made me feel for the first time that I was a scholar who was not just navel gazing, but that I was doing something, I was contributing. And then I was able to share all of this research with local scholars who had an interest in the same subject, but who had not found the same kind of material. So that's when I kind of became a part of that scholarly community as well. But just to kind of reflect, going to Myanmar was just such an amazing experience, being able to spend time with Buddhist monks and nuns and other people of the community. I don't want to sugarcoat it. There's a lot of problems with Buddhist chauvinism and different things like that. But I think it was seeing the ugliness alongside the what I would say the beautiful part of it that made this place kind of real for me. And I think those were the most formative moments, and especially because I went with my partner, and my partner helped me with my research, quite frankly. And so being able to experience all of that together with her, as opposed to like, okay, you have this separate world, I have my world, let's meet up later. Being able to experience this all together was really important. And that's ultimately, to go back to Daniel's point, what helped me get through those hard mental health kind of dips or valleys in my career. So
Thank you so much, Tony. There's so much in that story, too, that we can continue to talk about. First, the language learning, how you had to prepare yourself. And then it just actually sounds like a mystery novel, right? Finding just the right piece of archival research. And for our librarians, I'm sure it's very exciting to see how exciting it can be when, folks are able to find just the right piece for their research in your library. But the other part I think is very important is, graduate school does take several years, and it becomes a formative part of our lives. And finding ways to have family connect and to travel with you, not only for support, but to kind of, face the world together through the lens of the research is it's extremely exciting. It provides a depth to your family life, and it pushes against this idea that academics just have to sit by themselves and do that work by themselves without a community, without a family. And so there's a whole discussion around how do we do grad school, how do we do research, and how do we push back at some of the more traditional understandings of what does it mean to engage in scholarly work. Fabulous. Okay, we have some time for questions from the folks who are here. We have a lovely discussion in the chat. Take a moment, Daniel and Tony, to see the kinds of things that your work has sparked. Jeff was interested in Tony's words about writing, and Jeff and Ellie got into a discussion about writing, and we can pick that up. And Francis really resonated with Daniel's story about anxiety in the performing arts, and we can pursue that in terms of other arts like dance. And we said a quick hello to Tony's child, and I didn't see Tony. What's the name of your?
He's my nephew. He's my twin brother's child, and his name is Thatcher, but we call him Sachan. So his name's Thatcher. Yeah, I'm babysitting right now, so my partner is being very generous and taking him outside.
Oh, that's so sweet. That's so great. Okay, and we can talk about archiving. So lots of things to think about, lots of paths to follow. Do we have any questions? Feel free to unmic or comments. Everything is interesting to us. Nothing is uninteresting. And please unmic, or if you prefer, you can say, continue writing on the chat. The floor is open.
I'll jump in just to say appreciate kind of all the different ideas that are being shared. Really inspiring to hear from both of you, and just a kind of thread that I heard from both of you that I'd be curious as to hear a few more further thoughts on, having experienced it a bit in my PhD journey, was just that piece that both of you brought up of your kind of the intersection of your personal experience with your academic interests, and this piece that we kind of see, and I see this a lot in our undergraduate program also, is students coming to our courses for the lived experience piece. And I know in a lot of our BPMH courses we have reflective papers we're writing, students trying out mindfulness practices as their data and then writing about that. And so this interesting piece, as a qualitative researcher, we might propose that having passion for or being close to our subjects is not an issue, but we want to be reflexive about it. So, there's an interesting piece there. What is objectivity? What is science? Does anyone actually study anything they feel completely objective about and don't care about? So, lots that we could problematize and play with, and seeing more qualitative research in this field kind of progressing. I was interested to hear both of you share that personal connection. And I have that as well to the work I did. And, publishing that work and discussing it in like biomedical spaces has been very interesting in terms of how I frame reflexivity, what that looks like. So just curious to hear, any further thoughts you both had on how you're bringing both like personal experience and passion to intersect with kind of high quality, rigorous academic work. and how you might propose. I know lots of our undergraduate students ask me this question. They get kind of confused. I have basic scientists trying to write like social sciences papers where they're allowed to use like I and my. And so any tips you have, I guess, for like weaving together maybe different ways of producing knowledge, I think I hear in both of your work. So I was excited to hear that because it's challenges I've also faced, and would love to know more tips you have for students that might be experiencing that.
Great question, Ellie. Thanks so much. Do either Daniel or Tony want to add to anything they've already said?
Well, I think I also I definitely relate to everything you're saying, Ellie, because I have to write this narratological piece in this dissertation, and I thought that would be the easy part. That would be the part where I would just, I would, not have to think so hard. I wouldn't have to worry about citing every single thing I write, every sentence, and because it's coming from me, and but it actually is much harder because I have to personally reflect on what I'm not allowed to be perfectly objective, and I never really was in the first place, and I find that very, very challenging actually, and it's something that I'm constantly working on with my supervisor in order to he said sometimes I got to this one point in the writing, and he said, oh yeah, this part really works, and he says this part, it sounds like a blow by blow of all the bad things that have happened to you. I was like, yeah, that makes sense. So it's like, so how do we balance that and be objective? Well, I think being able to frame around it and relate it very specifically to the research that exists, and the not just to relate your lived experience to something that has been written about, because usually they say there's not really too much that's new under the sun. I find that there's a lot of things that I have experienced that I'm almost never the only one who's experienced that. So I can always find some kind of relationship to my research. I can always find some kind of way to connect it to the different systems that I'm using, because I'm studying. There is like a hard science element where I'm exploring the different therapies that are being used for music performance anxiety in cognitive behavioral psychology and third wave therapies. And so I have to really understand those, and then I have to really be able to write about them, and write about them in the context of that. And then I have to write about what guitarists have said. And in that, there is, like you said, you using meditation as data. Well, it's the same thing with performing, using practice as data, using that experience of having, there is a heuristic thing that you develop from having done a thing for years and years and years. There are things that you can understand that might not be accessible to those who have only studied it in a laboratory setting. And I think there's something really powerful about that. And without going too far into it, but I'm trying not to talk too much, but originally my project, it's really interesting, when I started was a little bit, I was trying to be more scientific in that way, and originally I wanted to do a survey of all the guitar professors in North America. There's only 400 of them, so I actually found all of them. and then I was going to send them and explore how they manage music performance anxiety strategies with their students. And that thesis ended up being rejected multiple times for a number of reasons, because of the feasibility and other different factors. And when I was asked to write about myself, I had a little bit of a reaction. I was a little bit like, what? What do you mean my feelings matter? What do you mean my experience matters? But when I see the things that I've done, the practice that I've done, the years and years and years of experience, that is something that is not necessarily available to a scientist who has done it and only studied it as a science. So there are things, when I first wrote it, my supervisor said, well, it sounds like you have an axe to grind with all the teachers, It sounds like you're going to only write about how stupid the teachers are and how they know nothing about music performance anxiety and how they're making all their students anxious. And I wasn't really going for that, but I felt that there was a part of me that really did sort of feel that way a bit. There was a little bit of an axe to grind. And what I actually found was the opposite. I found that the further I went into my research, the more I realized that teachers want to help their students, and they have a heuristic intelligence from their experience of being on stage, from their experience of having lived it so many times, that is valid and actually leads to future research in the hard science that ends up making progress. And I saw that multiple times in my research. So people talking about using yoga for the guitar, and then 5 or 6 years later, people are starting to study music performance anxiety and yoga and how it helps with all these other different things, including musculoskeletal problems and all these other things. So you can see how it leads, the emotion leads to the science and so on. But yeah, anyway, a little bit of a ramble.
Thank you, Daniel, so much. As you were speaking, I was reminded from the way that you were talking about putting things together that a wonderful community at U of T is the Center for Critical Health, Qualitative Health Research. In fact, they have a symposium that's going on this morning, and I put a link in case you have some time after our session. And Ellie has also talked about that, and it's another community that is dealing with these questions, but that was a beautiful, deep answer. Tony, I'm going to start another question just because I realize we're almost at 1. Could you start us off by moving us to your actual research? We've heard about the journey, we've heard about an important moment in the journey. Can you just tell us a little bit about your research and your research questions, and who are you hoping will engage with your research?
Thank you for the question. It's the easiest question and the hardest question. Been researching this for 7-8 years now, and I was just writing another kind of summary of it last night for another thing and for another event, and I thought how difficult it is even after all this time. But if I think speaking it out is usually the best for me, because I need to make sure that it's clear rather than just writing. And so I think the real question I'm kind of trying to answer is, in a sense, like, how do you control bodies? And in particular, how do you control the bodies of monks in Southeast Asia? And so what I mean by that is, I mean, in Myanmar, for instance, you have, let's say, a couple 100,000, 160,000 maybe young men who are ordained as monks, and then maybe about 30,000 women, young men, old men, young women, more advanced in age. And so that's a major population, and that's a major kind of block of power, you could say. And so this has been a kind of problem in Burmese history for a long time. You have this very influential group of people that have a lot of legitimacy that's kind of like beyond administrative control, beyond legislative control. And so how do you control the bodies of these groups of people? And so I look at mid-20th century Burma, because at this point, what you have is you have the end of about 60 years of really a colonial occupation. Like, the British came in, they completely revamped the entire society. They had an occupying force. That was the only way they were able to maintain power, at least for the first 15, 20 years. And then you have this devastating war, World War II, where you have foreign powers just, really devastating the countryside, leaving bloodbath. I mean, it was really kind of a frightful event. And then you have the first independence government in 1948. And so this is one of the very first kind of groups of independent governments that you see throughout Southeast Asia and Africa and elsewhere. And so the government is kind of facing this situation where they are civil wars ripping them apart, kind of Cold War politics, and they're coming off of such devastating geopolitical events, and so they're trying to kind of rebuild their society, and they turn to Buddhism as a way to rebuild their society. And so one of the ways that they're trying to kind of improve the moral hygiene. Now, I think it's a problematic term, but the moral hygiene of their population is through meditation, and particularly meditation centers that are good for lay people specifically. So lay people can go to these meditation centers. They can take a 10-day retreat. This is kind of a new phenomenon, relatively speaking, coming out of Southeast Asia, Burma in particular. And so they are trying to make use of the meditation center as a platform of their kind of Buddhist revivalist program, but also their nation building efforts. At the same time, though, they're trying to standardize the text of the Buddhist canon in order to control the bodies of the monks. Because when the monks discipline themselves and the nuns and monks are kind of taking guidance on how they should behave, they use texts either to kind of make reforms or be a little transgressive, and then texts are used also to kind of keep them in line. So the Buddhist government is trying to standardize the text that monks use to legitimize their actions, to control their bodies, and then it's trying to use the meditation center to control the bodies and the kind of moral and mental well-being of the population. Now, to kind of wrap this up quickly, I'm looking at a monk who's at the same time a meditation monk, who is a big part of this meditation center, this mass lay meditation movement, but he's also writing these texts that are controversial and are kind of trying to call for reforms that are against the orthodoxy of Buddhism at the time. And so these two projects actually come together in this one individual and a set of texts that he's writing and become very complicated. And really what it does is it kind of pops a hole in what I call the neoconservative Theravada Buddhism. So what I mean by that is that if you go to Burma today, they'll say, oh, we have the pure Buddhism, we have the real Buddhism, and all those other Buddhisms are good, but they're kind of fakes. And that's a facade. And that's something that has political, social history. And so this monk, he's kind of actually showing the poverty or the imaginary nature of that. And so I can't remember the second part of your question, but I'm looking at
Who do you want to engage your work?
Oh, yes. Okay. I think the main thing is there's, sets of Buddhist study scholars who are a little bit more traditional in the sense that they're steeped in text, but I want to engage with anyone who's really looking at the changes that are brought about by modernity. Now, I think that term is very problematic, but anyone who's studying the world from 1850 to 1950, and that includes here in Alberta with the First Nations people, the genocide that was going on with them, a lot of the same tactics that we see being used in Burma by colonial governments and then governments thereafter are also being used in other parts of the world. So I think I'd like to, anyone who's interested in that kind of temporal period there.
Tony, you did a great job of making your research come alive for folks who haven't, been well read in the same area as you have. And what I love about your project is through the study of the life and the work of one particular monk, you're able to say so much about the socio-economic historical moment that he lived in. And what you're doing is making connections to our present moment and showing us what history can teach us. So rich. Thank you so much. Daniel, we had a chance to hear a little bit about your thesis because it became such an important part of your story. But maybe just for now, because we're getting closer to the time where we have to wrap up, and I want to hear some final thoughts from the folks who are here. Who do you hope will engage with your thesis that brings together this question of what do we do with performance anxiety and what the study of Buddhism and engagement with Buddhism and meditation can do to help us think through musical anxiety in performance?
Yeah, that's a great question. I guess I'll try to answer it as succinctly as possible, but I really want particularly guitar teachers and classical music educators to engage with the material that I'm writing, because I want it to first of all be taken seriously. I want the idea of music performance anxiety can sometimes be misunderstood, even for those who are claim to be advocates of mental health. They might think of it as a kind of minor experience or a very focal experience, but it really takes over the entire individual. So being able to have educators, some educators read it and perhaps learn how to manage their students' symptoms and help find ways to use their specific instrumental knowledge to find ways to bring essentially mindfulness practices into their practice. Because a big part of what we're talking about here is particularly from acceptance and commitment therapy, we're seeing the real power of it is coming from being able to diffuse our thoughts, to be able to look at our thoughts objectively. And so when I often will have students and they'll be playing and they'll say, "Oh, that sucks," or "I'm the worst," or they'll kind of often they'll even swear at themselves. And to be able to look at that and say, all right, we're going to call that critical Sarah. If the student's name is Sarah, we'll say that's critical Sarah. Do you notice critical Sarah? Say hello and goodbye. Say thanks but no thanks. And to be able to bring that into the lesson, because I think that music performance anxiety is really like absolutely as important as practicing scales. If we go on, if someone is a musician, then they're sharing their music with others, and even if they make recordings, they still get those same nervousness. It's still just as powerful. And so being able to know how to manage our emotions and being able to manage our experience of music performance anxiety is technique. It's so that's, I want educators to read it mostly, and students.
Thank you, Daniel. You're going to revolutionize music education. So powerful. We have a few minutes, 3, for some final questions or some final comments. Is there something that you heard from Daniel and Tony that is going to stay with you, that makes you think about your own plans or your own research? We're interested in everything. Tara, do I see that you maybe want to, we need you to unmute, I think.
Sorry about that. Okay, I just wanted to say that I really resonated with the anxiety in music performance and some of the intersectionality that we've found in both of your research, actually, in the lived experience and the different disciplines that are kind of come into play. I know myself, I got scared off pursuing music because of an audition process. I wanted to go into music therapy at Laurier, but the audition process just completely scared me off that direction. So I really do appreciate that, because that could have significantly changed my life trajectory, but I like where I am, but obviously it does impact people's lives. And so, yeah, I really, really appreciate that. And I love that it's starting to explore some of the places that intersections do exist for both of you, between these different areas that a lot of people had their own little section in previous academia where they studied this thing and then this other person studied this thing, but they didn't explore how they connected. So together. It's wonderful. Thank you.
Tara, that's wonderful. Also, of course, wonderful to hear that you're happy where you are. But I will say, it's never too late to go back, right? And if something you've learned here gives you strategies for trying again, well, you have lots of years to explore. So there we go. And we have time for one more response to what we've heard today.
I would echo in a way what Tara was just saying, that I really appreciated how Tara Goldstein's question, we're able to really bring out in both Daniel and Tony's work how much crossover there is between one's personal life and one's academic research. And of course, as Ellie was saying, of course that's the case. And yet so often, at least in many of our disciplines, we're encouraged to pretend that it's not the case. But certainly, all the more richer our research is if over the course of our lives, it's shaped by the nature of our lives and ourselves. And so I think it's wonderful that we can talk about that.
Thank you, Frances. Well, I can't think of a better place to say thank you to Daniel. Thank you to Tony. We had an amazing time getting to know you, getting to know your work. We're so happy that you are Senior Doctoral Fellows with Buddhism, Psychology, and Mental Health. I know there are a lot of other folks who wanted to be here, but they will be able to hear from you through our recording, which we'll put on the new college website. We wish you a wonderful rest of the semester, and we're looking forward to hearing your presentations in April. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go down. Thank you so much. Could we all unmic and just give Daniel and Tony our greatest thanks? Thank you so much. Beautiful, beautiful.
Good job, Danielle.
Yes.
Nice meeting you. Nice meeting you, Tony. Yeah, it's great. And thank you, everyone, for having me. Yeah.
Thank you, everyone.
To see you all.
Lovely to see you all. Thanks for coming and enjoy your Friday. Bye.
Yeah.
Have a great day. Bye.
Bye, everyone.